Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Thank you, Dr. Hurwitz. Thank you, HRS. It's an honor to be here. I feel completely unworthy of this honor, but I don't take it lightly. I'm going to start by this saying, which I think many of you have already heard before, that change is not merely necessary to life, it is life. This is a saying from Alvin Toffler, who many of you know is a great American writer and a futurist. And I think this resonates with everybody out here because all of us have seen change, either socially, culturally, geopolitically. Medicine, too, is in this state of change, in this state of transition. This burgeoning digital metamorphosis is going to change the way we actually receive and deliver care. And over the course of the next few minutes, if I survive, as long as my wearable doesn't show my heart rate and blood pressure up there, I think I'll be good. I hope to convince you and talk to you about the role of sensors, role of data and AI, how it can fill the gaps in the healthcare system. And then talk to you about how unique we are as electrophysiologists looking after our patients, and how EP in particular has this unique ability to really shape the future models of care. So you'll see a fair number of images today, and they're all AI generated with my, I would say, suboptimal prompt engineering. So don't blame me for that. But here we have a self-replicating single cell. This is our humble origin, 13.4 billion years ago. And I think we've transformed into these multicellular organisms. And much has evolved as a consequence of the intercellular flow of ions and charges. It is this electricity within us and outside of us that has allowed us to transcend time, transcend through the ages, through the periods, to the different revolutions, to where we are now, the information age, the revolution of intelligence. Now, before I go any further, I would like to actually explain my vantage point to you, and much of that vantage point is dependent on my journey through 3 healthcare systems. I grew up in India, where my formative years in medicine were at David Sassoon General Hospital and King Edward Memorial Hospital in Bombay and Pune, reverse order. Following that, I got a scholarship to go to Oxford, did my doctorate there, but was also a senior registrar at the John Radcliffe Hospital practicing medicine out there. And then took a boat, landed up in the US at the Framingham Heart Study, and through the Framingham Heart Study, I then landed up at Mass General Hospital, did my entire training, have been on faculty for almost 20 years out there, and they haven't fired me as yet. But what I'm really trying to bring forth out here is that I have seen change. I've had the opportunity of working in an under-resourced environment in India, where I practiced. I had the opportunity of working in a resource-constrained environment in the UK, and a well-resourced environment here in the US. And trust me, none of them work really well. If I may say with some degree of trepidation, the US healthcare system is big, fat, and sick. I think you'll agree with me out there. And I think we are indefensible when it comes to care quality metrics because we're bleeding money. About 20% of our GDP, $4 trillion, is spent in healthcare, which is equivalent to the economy of a developed nation in Europe. Now, having said that, we are still indefensible on our care quality metrics. And the problem is we're inept to some extent. We're inefficient for sure, but we're very inequitable. And bigger problem is that we're very opaque. We're opaque when it comes to reimbursement. We're opaque when it comes to the variability in clinical practice within hospitals itself, within regions itself, nationally across state borders. Forget about internationally out here. The big thing out here is that we talk through both sides of our mouth because we talk about practicing value-based medicine, but we are beholden by this culture of margins, right? And we are a living contradiction, and we are a living contradiction because the wellness of our institutions, The wellness of our hospitals, the wellness of our organizations depends on the sickness of our patients. The wellness of our electrophysiology laboratories depends on the number of patients that have atrial fibrillation. And I think it is our business, it is our responsibility to think larger. Not only resynchronize hearts, but see how we collectively as a community can remodel healthcare. So I'm going to take you through a story of a patient of mine. I want you to meet Paul. I met Paul in 2003 when I was a newly minted electrophysiologist, actually in July of 2003. I came on as faculty, and Paul at that point in time was 71 years old. Paul had 4 chronic diseases. He had heart failure, he had hypertension, he had diabetes, and he had kidney failure. He was on hemodialysis for 7 years before he saw me, okay? Ejection fraction, as you can see out there, was 15 to 20%, give or take 5 on either side. He was referred to me because in 2002, there was this newly minted technique of cardiac resynchronization therapy that just got approved by the FDA. So in 2003, he was referred for that. His 1-month mortality was 90%. He was class 3, class 4 NYHA. And his 6-month mortality was 100%. And much against the advice of my senior colleagues, I just decided, let's give this guy a CRTP and see what happens out here. Now, I'll come back to Paul in a little bit, but I want to talk about what really went wrong. What went wrong was he had hypertension and diabetes for several years, several decades, that was untreated, that resulted in end organ failure and got him to where he actually is. Now, I'm going to come back to this, but I think it's really important for us to recognize that medicine is beyond making a diagnosis. Medicine is for the patient finding a tenable life with their disease states. For Paul, it was finding a tenable life with renal failure, going to hemodialysis 3 days a week, and with heart failure with recurrent admissions. For a clinician, it's about meeting patient expectations. Meeting patient expectations in a busy working environment in the hospital. And God knows all of us fail on that on a regular basis because we're pulled in so many different directions. But now we are blessed. We are blessed with massive connectivity. We're blessed with ubiquitous data. We're blessed with processing power that can allow us to rechange, to rethink, and to reinvent care the way we deliver it to our patients. And if I can leave you with one message today for the edge of EP on medicine or the future of care, it will be that it's going to be partially virtual, it will be sensor-aided, it will be powered by artificial intelligence with sustainable workflows that will translate into better clinical outcomes. Now, a lot of parts to the equation out here, but let's break that up a little bit. Let's talk about senses and sensors, and this is something everybody already understands, but such a beautiful saying by Immanuel Kant, who says that all knowledge begins with the senses. It is our visual, our auditory, our tactile perceptions, all the knowledge that comes to our graphical processing unit out here, our brain, is where we get our knowledge from. But every one of these analog experiences are actually electrical charges. Every cell, every organ in the body operates through binary codes. I didn't know this, or I didn't think about the human body in that light, but that allows us to actually envisage that we can break the human body into digital dashboards. We can construct digital dashboards that are automobile equivalent with the check engine light situation where we can monitor, we can predict and forecast disease. And I think we've been doing this in EP for so long, right? We've been implanting sensors for decades now. Now we have sensors that can measure left atrial pressure. We have sensors inside atrial leads that can measure cardiac contractility. We have sensors inside devices that can measure respiratory rate, heart rate, transthoracic impedance, tidal volume, so many of them. And we have data now from different studies, whether it's the Selene HF study or the multi-sense study, that you can actually predict. You can predict heart failure 30 days before it actually occurs. But it just as a pointer out here, Paul's device in 2003 did not have sensors and did not have remote monitoring and did not have the luxury of actually monitoring him and getting him to any place that we would have desired to. But I'll come back to that in a little bit. But your question to me would be is, not everybody has implantable devices. How do we take care of those patients? Well, there are a slew of now wearables that can actually serve as surrogates for all those implantable devices, right? These can be worn on our wrists. They can be worn in our earbuds. They can be worn as jewelry. They can be worn anywhere along our smart fabrics. On top of that, there are ambient sensors. There are sensors on toilet seats that can measure your weight, record your ECG, and at the same time assess your microbiome. A lot happening out there. And we have sensors that can now continuously monitor our glucose levels. There are sensors that are being developed for measuring troponin as well as BNP, which are around the corner. So there are several strategies out there, but I think it's important, again, to recognize out here that in EP and heart failure, for a stable heart failure situation to devolve into an acute exacerbation, either in sudden cardiac death or heart failure, there's a play of several covariates out there. Some of these covariates we already know are the comorbidities and the triggers that you can see up there. And then we have sensors for each one of these clinical covariates. And then we have sophisticated sensors that we already talked about. And we have device diagnostics that we also touched upon. And you can only imagine that the interplay of these different covariates and those clinical sensors can allow us to predict which patients are individually more susceptible for sudden death, arrhythmias, or heart failure exacerbations. Now, the question that comes up is, how do you bring this together? I mean, this is all data, this is different sensors out there. And I think the answer lies in our hands. The answer lies in our smartphones. Smartphones can actually integrate data from the implantable, from the wearable, and ambient sensors. It can offload this onto the cloud. It can layer it on the EMR that can allow us to provide better individualized representation of what the patient is. Now, smartphones also provide the opportunity for high-touch technology, right? It's in our hand all the time. That can approximate concierge care if we are able to use it in the right way. We can now digitally phenotype patients. And at the same time, we can actually monitor chronic diseases like hypertension, heart failure, diabetes, all of which Paul had, right? Now, with that, the question comes up, so much of data. How do you deal with this data? Some of this is visible in the electronic medical records that we can see, right? All of those variables, demographics, and the like that we understand. But there's this whole invisible data. The social, the cultural, the environmental data, the omics, and it is upon us. It is upon us to use AI to collect, annotate, curate, aggregate, and analyze that data, because Daniel K. Morans has said very elegantly that you can have data. You can have data without information, but you cannot have information without data. So this brings us to the different AI-based strategies that already exist out here. And there's so much work that is happening in this field. But I think you will all agree with me that machine eyes or deep learning algorithms, whatever you want to look at and call them, can help us reconfigure risk. And one of the lowest hanging fruits is the ECG. And we know now that using machine eyes, you can diagnose LV systolic dysfunction. You can diagnose HFpEF. You can diagnose aortic stenosis. You can diagnose mitral regurgitation. You can diagnose hypertrophic cardiomyopathy off a simple surface ECG. There's work from my colleagues, Dr. Khurshid and Dr. Steve Lubitz, that have actually predicted atrial fibrillation within a 5-year period just from the surface ECG, showing that it works better than conventional risk strategies. There's work from the Mayo Clinic, from Dr. Friedman and group, that have actually shown that you can predict atrial fibrillation within 30 days of recording an ECG. And there is work from Dave Crumman, who's actually shown that you can look at a 12-lead arrhythmic ECG and predict where that arrhythmia is coming from. So there's a lot of moving parts right now. We just need to figure out and find the way of how to integrate them into clinical practice. Now, Paul had atrial fibrillation. I forgot to mention that. He also had non-sustained VT, long runs of non-sustained VT. He had atrial fibrillation and was readmitted many times with atrial fibrillation. And I think it's, again, important to recognize that we have machine learning strategies, sensor-based approaches, and AI-based approaches looking at the ECG that can help us now risk stratify patients. We know that you can use machine learning on electronic medical records and substratify patients. Substratify them into high risk, moderate risk, and low risk, and then do stage screening with sensors and variables to really make it economical to identify which patients are at the highest risk for having atrial fibrillation. There are patch monitors now, work that we've done, which can actually, off the first few hours of the patch monitor, you can actually determine whether they're going to develop atrial fibrillation further down the line. And there's work from my colleagues in France that have actually used watches with cloud-based algorithms to measure the QT interval to see if patients are susceptible to arrhythmias on an outpatient basis. Some of this is being validated as we speak here in the US at our center and other centers, but this is transforming the way we actually practice clinical medicine. Now, I like to show this particular picture is because when I got off the boat at Oxford, one of the first things to do my doctorate, one of the first things that was handed to me was this Holter monitor of this patient who died while having the Holter monitor on with just 8 hours of the recording. And I was told, go figure, since my thesis was on ECG signaling, and I spent 16 hours a day for 16 weeks measuring every possible interval on that 8-hour ECG strip, trying to figure out if I could come up with a hypothesis as to why that particular patient died and what were the events leading to that sequence of events. Okay, took me a lot of time, generated an interesting paper, but now at the touch of a button, we can generate which patients are at risk for having VT-VF in the next 14 days, looking after the first few hours off a patch monitor. Over and above, beyond that, there's work from Gaurav Upadhyay and his group that have looked at remote monitoring and predicting which patients can actually develop VT-VF. We have work from Neil Chatterjee from the University of Washington that has now looked at machine learning strategies on electronic medical records to see which patients are more susceptible for out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. Now, not all machine learning strategies are hunky-dory. Nothing always works well, right? Especially when you're looking at atrial fibrillation recurrences and you're looking at heart failure readmissions, it all falls apart. And I think a part of that is because of this waning predictive ability over time. As you move away from the baseline situation, risk is dynamic, right? And that's why it reinforces the need for what we started off with, is that we need sensors, we need continuous data, we need AI that can use this continuous data and help better risk stratify patients for us. There's great work from Mayo Clinic from Dr. Cha, who actually looked at CRT. Paul had a CRT device. Said, how can we predict patients who are going to do well with CRT? And machine learning algorithms, unfortunately, don't work really well. Humbling results out here. And they're humbling because many of the determinants of predictive power of these algorithms depends on the data set. And if you have missing variables as to where the lead is located, what the activation sequence is, what the scar distribution is, what the interplay between the lead and the scar is, you're not going to have a great model. And I think it's really important out here that this whole phase of multimodal AI comes into play, where you have data being generated from different sources of data, not just the text and the tables and the EMR, but audio, speech, images, videos, because that data can change our predictive ability to a completely different level. Because some of these things, just as we see in ECGs, reflect social, cultural, environmental influences on the human construct, which single variables don't necessarily always capture. And then there is work I'm doing alongside Colin Stultz at MIT, which is looking at multimodal AI with event-based contrast learning so that we can predict which patients develop heart failure readmissions and atrial fibrillation recurrences with a greater level of accuracy in a more individualized fashion. Now we know that there's a big difference between digital and biological intelligence, right? I think we all recognize that. But it is incumbent upon us to really try to harness this collective intelligence to really replicate the human anatomy and physiology into what we call as digital twins. This allows us to model, allows us to simulate different strategies, to really provide personalized medicine at the highest level. There's a beautiful saying from Arthur Clarke who says, the only way to find the limits of the possible is going beyond them into the impossible. And our colleagues here at HRS, Dr. Trajanova and Dr. Niederer and others, are actually doing just that. They are trying to construct digital twins so we understand electrophysiology a little better. Now, this is reality in real time. I really apologize for showing this video to you. These are my pathetic dance moves, and this is when I was at South by Southwest a few months ago. The reason I'm showing this to you is that you can holographically be in two places at the same time. I'm there in the box at the same time I'm standing outside. I'm giving you a lecture right now, but actually I'm in New Delhi. So what I want to say is that we are redefining space, time, and intelligence. We are redefining reality in real time. Now we have ways of actually sitting in our home on our armchairs and actually practicing clinical strategies and technical approaches to doing ablations and other interventional approaches. We are at home attending conferences using virtual reality strategies, and over and above and beyond that, we can now treat situational phobias sitting at home using our VR glasses. We can do cardiac rehabilitation using VR glasses. And now we're also moving into the space of augmented reality. This is the Senti-AR technology where we've been using as a part of the Paradigm AF study. Where this is, you can see I'm doing an AF ablation out here, pulling in that three-dimensional electroanatomical map, being able to move it, individualize the approach out there. It's going to ask of us to reskill ourselves, to repurpose some of our skill sets. It is going to change how other people interface with us in the laboratory, and job descriptions will also change over time. And I think it's important that generative AI and large language models that we talk about are going to really influence care. We already know that large language models can decode data sets, right? For the first time, a patient and a physician can talk to data like it's a human. Right? This is taking us to the next level of keyboard liberation, the revolution of keyboard liberation, where we can construct visit notes while we're just casually talking with the patient. We can summarize charts with just the press of a button for the entire year's visit. At the same time, we can respond to our patients without actually having to generate the email, but through an AI chatbot that generates it much more empathetically than we can. Generative AI will unchain us from a lot of the mundane tasks that we're doing, like pre-authorizations, prescription refills. So our job descriptions and repurposing of a lot of people is going to change over the coming time. But what generative AI can also do, there is data now that it can generate EMR alerts of high-risk patients based off ECG characteristics and other clinical variables. And can you only imagine that when you can talk to your data, how it's going to close the loop between the patient and their data and facilitate for the first time self-management approaches, right? That's the only way healthcare will become sustainable, when patients have the tools and when we can actually get them engaged in managing themselves. Now, not everything about AI is hunky and dory, right? I think there are uncharted, turbulent waters that we're walking through, and if we want to be unbiased and we want to be fair, we have to make sure that all the variables we have are validated in a large population of patients. We want to make sure the data sets that we use are representative of all the entire population and not just a select few. If the black box thing remains an issue and AI is not explainable, then trust and transparency will be issues. And I think we need to find answers for them. As we move down the path of trying to make healthcare more accessible, more equitable, privacy and security are going to be issues again, and that's where oversight and accountability with the regulatory bodies is really, really important. ChatGPT, large language models, we all know confabulate hallucinate, can mislead, can misinform, so still require a lot of human oversight. But we also know that all these strategies are going to redefine, topic I love, going to redefine our disciplines. It's going to change our job descriptions, where many of us are going to have to reskill ourselves. And I think that's something, again, is looming around the corner in EP2, and we need to start thinking about that actively. So what about Paul? Coming back to Paul, so you remember he was on hemodialysis, and he was in heart failure, class 4 NYHA. Well, you also know that he lost his entire youth to renal and heart failure. Enormous expense on the system, on the healthcare system, as well as the personal turbulence that he and his family went through. But what happened was his ejection fraction improved from 15 to 20% to 65%. Paul, at the age of 76, became eligible for renal transplant, and his anonymous neighbor donated her kidney to Paul. So Paul now, at the age of 77, was free of renal failure and heart failure. He became a dancing instructor at a senior center, found his wife, married Margarita, moved to Florida, and started an antique business out there. Paul is 92 years today, 20 years after he was told that he had 1 month to live, thanks to electrophysiology. Now, the issue out here was that chronic diseases were allowed to progress. I think I made that point clear to you. Everything was preventable because since 2007, Paul had no atrial fibrillation, no recurrence of heart failure hospitalization, and none of the issues that he had before, because he got care from us through remote monitoring, multidisciplinary care, sensor-based approaches, all of the things that I would talk about. This is a picture of Paul just 3 weeks ago in clinic, 93 now. Got the age-related issues, but looks fantastic, doing great out there. But I think what we really want to talk about here is that we've built these technologies off the back of many of the innovators sitting in this audience out here. And it is an honor to be an electrophysiologist and actually use these technologies. But at the same time, we owe a debt to society. We have to think about whole body, whole human, whole health system care beyond just what we are as electrophysiologists. Now, for future models of care, I think it's, again, important to recognize that whatever models we create have to have sustainable value. And to be able to do that, we need to be able to foster digital care. And it's important, again, to differentiate between what is digital and what is digitized, because being digitized, that is, you have your records digitized, is not being digital. Being digital is a change in the value proposition of care. It is a change in the way we culture, in the change in the culture of practice. It is a change of how we look after our patients. It is the transition from transactional care to continuous care. It is the opportunity of really putting remote monitoring on steroids and managing our patients at their best wherever they are at any point in time and across the entire life cycle of disease, and not just electrophysiological problems, but with every disease state. Many other specialties now are learning from us, and I've had the opportunity of working with many of them to really set up remote monitoring systems outside of cardiology, ophthalmology, oncology, neurology. This allows us to practice exception-based care. That is, you see the patient only when you need to see them. It allows, at the same time, for patients to manage their own disease, the MYOD concept, which I think is becoming a bigger and bigger issue, and one of the only ways that healthcare can become sustainable. And the future lies in multidisciplinary provider platforms. Before patients actually even develop their arrhythmias or sudden cardiac death, we have multidisciplinary platforms that can actually monitor them with the information, but also provide individualized care so we can make sure that they see the best of life that they have in front of them. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb out here. I think all of us are immersed in this whole concept of systemness right now. But what it's setting the stage for is this realm of networkness. I think there will be an era of openness, and if I may say so, and that era of openness is going to be a change in the social order of practice of clinical medicine. Much of that will be driven by patient expectations. Much of care will become sensor-aided and AI-powered. Much of that will allow personalized care. And we at HRS and all of us out here are obligated to find low-cost technology to ensure that we can ensure digital as well as global health equity. Now, before I conclude, I think all of us recognize that medicine reflects our deepest realities, and trying to replace it with a digitally exclusive experience doesn't make sense, right? I think we are fearful that excessive connectivity can disconnect us. We are fearful that personalized medicine can become impersonal, and it is incumbent upon us to preserve the human touch, preserve the human bond while we use the digital touch out there. And I'd like to conclude with this wonderful saying from Francis Peabody, that the secret of the care of the patient lies in caring for the patient. Thank you very much.